Hello everyone, and welcome back to my channel, where everything you're about to hear and see has been done in one take. I am your host, the One Take Man. Today I'm moving away from my regular content of remaking movies, or saying how I remake movies, to present to you my personal history with professional wrestling. Because I imagine some of you might find it interesting, precisely because it's kind of different from how it generally goes, or what I think is how it generally goes. Generally, I imagine most people get into the pro wrestling fandom when they're between the ages of 3 and 10, and they have a relative, maybe a parent, maybe an uncle, who takes them to a local wrestling show. They love it, and then they find out, oh wait, there's also wrestling on TV. I can also watch that. And that's how it starts. That's at least how I imagine it. You can go ahead and tell me if I'm wrong. For me, in that time interval, my home country didn't really have wrestling shows. So what I know about wrestling that I learned in that interval, I learned from through pop cultural osmosis. As in, certain cartoons would sometimes have some kind of a fight that would take place in a wrestling ring with all the associated pizzazz. My first contact with genuine wrestling that was organized by a name brand company which had name brand talent came when I was 14. The main sports broadcaster of my home country started regularly showing wrestling shows from a major wrestling federation, the WWE to be more specific. It was an episode of Raw, and I saw two guys who I later learned were John Cena and Booker T, or as he was known at the time, King Booker, talking about how great they are, what accomplishments they had, and why that means they would win some match they would have in the near future. And then music hits, and a third guy, who's even bigger, comes out and says, "You're all wrong. I'm gonna win because etc. etc." Yes, that is in fact the Big Show who I mean. So that should tell you when I jumped into wrestling. So yeah, and the show wasn't just about these three. Over the next few hours, you had other people who came out, and they had their own gimmicks, they had their own presentations, they had their own entrance themes, they had their own unique way of wrestling, their unique moves, and their own styles. It hooked me. It drew my attention. It made me interested. I wanted to stick around and see what was next. And then the announcer said that they'll be back next week, and I was like, okay, now I'll know. Next week it's something else. Maybe I'll look at it again. I tuned into that same broadcaster the next day actually, and saw a different show, also by WWE. And yes, it was SmackDown, and it was a completely different show, but with completely different dudes, different gimmicks, different presentations, different moves, who could put on various different matches. And again, I was hooked. I learned that there's this bigger world. I had no... Okay, it's not bigger, it's different. It's different, I had no context for it, but other than pop cultural osmosis, but still I was hooked. I wanted to know more. It was interesting enough. And so yeah, that's how it started. I found out who these guys are that I was watching. I found out what the deal with their company is. I found out that there are other companies that they create and promote wrestling shows. So yeah, pretty fun stuff. And that's how I started getting into wrestling. And I watched wrestling regularly from before high school to about the time I started going to university. And luckily enough for me, it wasn't. And I also I also had it also had a secondary benefit because just as I was getting hooked, a lot of other people around me were also getting hooked. It was the first time we had a wrestling shows broadcast in my own country, so yeah, so it drew a following pretty quickly. Mostly guys. Most most of them were my age, some younger, some older, but still, it struck a chord with a lot of people, including some people I didn't think I would, and I didn't think I would find some common ground with, and it allowed me to come out of my shell a little bit more, and finally gave me something more substantial I could and something I could relate with when it came to talking with schoolmates and such. And for the first time, I kind of had this vessel for community, and I really appreciated it for that. And don't get me wrong, wrestling grew very popular very fast. And just like all things that become very popular very fast, it soon attracted detractors, because that's how that works. People who say, there's no way that could be true, or it's scripted, or it's staged, all the way to the ever so popular, it's fake. Yeah. And eventually, my peers jumped on the it's fake bandwagon and started disavowing this shit. So I went this stuff. So eventually, I went from this kind of weird kid who also likes wrestling to just this weird kid who still likes wrestling. And yeah. The thing about my relationship with wrestling is that even though it was staged, I still wanted to buy into it, and I still seriously bought into it for for a long time. It was only after I've already been a university student for a while that it finally dawned on me. Oh wait, there's really nothing genuine. There's nothing genuine about it. Thing is, and I hung on to that illusion because it brought me something I never really had before, a certain degree of inspiration, a way to feel better about myself, a way to a way to feel stronger, a way to feel empowered, a way to feel more confident. And somehow I latched on to pro wrestling as my source of confidence. And whenever someone said that that's fake, it wasn't just it wasn't some criticism. It came off as an attack for a while, and I refused to let someone else's impression of this thing that means a lot to me break my enjoyment of it. That tended to ostracize me. I'll freely admit to that. After a while, though, even I could see that the mask was starting to slip. But still I didn't care because, well, it was something I found endearing. It was something that allowed me to see what it was like to be powerful, to be playful, or rather to indulge in a certain sense of power and of of self-discovery. And for some reason pro wrestling allowed that in a way nothing else in my life had until then. And that's what I wanted to hold on to, and I've held on to it all throughout high school. 2 shows a week, and I caught them as often as I could, and I loved it. I kind of stopped watching wrestling regularly when I started going to university, and I had other things to worry about, because it was also the first time I moved out on my own. So I really had to get myself settled in a lot of ways, and only then could I really start watching wrestling regularly again. Thing is, I tried to, but at the point I tried again, the mask, which had up until then just slipped slightly, now fell completely off. Like, there was no more facade. I could immediately tell how it was done, and somehow the magic was just ruined for me. But it wasn't ruined permanently. It was ruined for a while. I was still curious about these people. I was still curious about where they worked, and I was still curious to see what was going on in this world. So I still kept up with the pro wrestling news. I still kept up with the results for certain shows. I still kept up with how cards for a certain show develop. I also learned terminology, of course. So yeah. Nowadays my relationship to pro wrestling is about the same as it was when I started university. I still try to catch up on results, try to keep myself informed on what's going on in the business, and I still catch wrestling shows as often as I can, which is admittedly not as often as I'd like, but what you gonna do? So yeah, that's pretty much my how I deal with pro wrestling, how I've interacted with pro wrestling over my lifetime. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope to see you next time when I'll do another pro wrestling themed video. I have a few things I'd like to mention next time, and I hope I'll see you then. Thank you once again for your attention. I have been the One Take Man.